My name is Bimbola Akinbola, and I'm an artist and assistant professor of performance studies at Northwestern University. When I began my doctoral research in 2012, I was searching for trauma. I spent 3 years of coursework preoccupied with what first and second generation Americans did with the trauma inherited from their parents and grandparents. As a first generation American of Nigerian descent, I was particularly curious about the trauma of migration and exile for African diasporic immigrants. And as an artist, I was drawn to the creative work that emerged out of these circumstances. I wanted to know how art and performance could be used to transform it. I was introduced to the work of Ruby Amanze by another artist I'd been writing about, Wura Natasha Ogunji, right before my 2015 trip to Nigeria. Although I knew that Ruby was an artist, it was months after we'd hung out drinking beers at an open mic night in Lagos that I truly experienced her art. And that was when I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. Ruby, who was born in Port Harcourt in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria and raised in England and the US, is an incredible artist working primarily in pencil and collage. In her work, she takes familiar forms such as animals, aliens, astronauts, and scenarios like travel, leisure, and daydreaming, and she remixes them in unfamiliar ways using Xerox transfers to create new hybrid forms, naming and categorizing her characters by their habits and history, and linking forms and figures according to diasporic logics. A recurring character in her work is Ada the alien, who she created while doing a Fulbright in Nigeria. Although Ada the alien's features are almost identical to Ruby's, she describes Ada the alien as borrowing her likeness, but not quite being her. She writes of Ada, quote, "I wanted to tell stories about how my time in Nigeria and my experiences and how I was moving through the space as an alien, even though it is also my home. This is why I developed this character, to use her and her voice to tell this story," end quote. I've been fascinated by Ada for years. She's fluorescent yellow, her color inspired by Western images of glowing green and yellow aliens. And over time, Ruby created additional characters to fill the magical universe Ada the alien navigated, which became her series, Aliens, Hybrids, and Ghosts. In her artist statement for this series, she writes, quote, "These drawings are part of an ongoing nonlinear narrative that exists between constructed realities, memory, and make-believe. Ada the alien and her cohort of kindred creatures fluidly navigate their self-imagined chimeric universe, simultaneously positioned between nowhere and everywhere." Ruby's aesthetic choices make her worlds legible as fully fledged realities with their own set of rules and particular order, which privileges queerness and hybridity. And Ruby also utilizes world making in her drawings in order to reject a narrative of displacement as trauma, which she says viewers of her work often place upon the images. Insisting on the playfulness and ease of her characters who exist comfortably and most importantly, playfully, in her description of the series, Ruby asserts, quote, "I do think we humans figure things out by playing, but I also think play in a certain context is a privilege reserved for a few, and I don't just mean children. My African packaged body embraces the freedom of play in this America that says otherwise, that says I should be traumatized or anguished or cautious or angry. But joy is a birthright, an entitlement that cannot be stolen. I play in life and I play in art, and I've stopped apologizing for not being sad. To invent feels like the ultimate freedom. To claim space to pleasure feels like a revolution," end quote. For Ruby plays a political act, an act of defiance, particularly in the United States, where her Black African body is expected to be primarily a site of trauma and anger. Her drawings utilize a vast amount of white space and compositions that disrupt firm ideas of time or place, and often show her characters flying or falling. They're infinite landscapes of play, leisure, and community. My research foregrounds the work of contemporary artists like Ruby, who straddle multiple geographies, identities, and allegiances, and analyzes how they resist popular understandings of what's been deemed proper conduct for women in Nigeria and its diaspora, a process that I call disbelonging. So while disbelonging has largely been used as a catch-all term to describe a range of feelings and experiences antagonistic to belonging, in my research, I developed disbelonging to describe this ambivalent relationship between alienation and belonging. I used disbelonging to name the process by which these artists use their art to remix, recode, and queer hegemonic conceptualizations of cultural and national belonging, really in order to embrace the liberatory potential of their own in-betweenness. So their works depict visual and literary landscapes where women move freely through time and space and embody hybrid and non-human forms, engaging playfully with one another and unapologetically embodying contradiction. I position disbelonging as a particularly queer way of being in community, one that destabilizes the categories of belonging we've come to know, instead looking to the ways labor, affect, and imagination commingle to create fleeting communal sites of belonging, sites that are continuously reimagined and reinvented. Given the size and breadth of the Nigerian diaspora and the growing body of work on migration, diaspora, and the contributions of first and second generation immigrants, surprisingly little scholarship has been produced about subject formation within the Nigerian diaspora. While I do refer to the Nigerian diaspora, my research, by focusing solely on this diaspora, seeks to consider how a micro-study of the African diaspora brings to light the minute negotiations, cultural exchanges, and border crossings that are often looked over when we conduct large-scale surveys of African diasporic art, in order to provide a fuller understanding of Black subject formations that are not solely beholden to colonial understandings of place and space. Nigeria is the most populous country on the African continent, consisting of hundreds of distinct ethnic groups and languages. With this in mind, it's important to remember that the land called Nigeria and the people called Nigerians did not exist until the 20th century. As Toyin Falola writes, quote, "Over the course of human history, many different groups of people have migrated into and out of the region that is now known as Nigeria. Many societies and states and even vast empires have risen and fallen, none of them has had any direct correlation to the Nigerian state that exists today." By focusing on artists all uniquely situated within the same diaspora, I call into question the construction of diasporas and how we understand them in an attempt to disrupt the ways they've been homogenized, pointing to the deep complexity and range of experiences that exist within these dispersed global communities. Although the artists that I write about in my project are technically situated within what we call the Nigerian diaspora, their experiences are deeply varied. Each of these artists uses their art form to speak to a wider community of African diasporic women, considering the ways in which their Blackness and gender identities shape, inform, and even disrupt their lived realities in all of the places they attempt to call home. So by focusing on Nigeria specifically, I want to draw attention to the myth of the Nigerian diaspora as a cohesive political or even cultural project, and redefine diaspora as built around a desire to orient oneself on one's own terms. I use diaspora not as a static signifier, but as a way to describe a particular orientation that looks towards the real and imagined homeland in order to decenter and destabilize the West as the primary locus from which to understand and position oneself. I also seek to name and identify the ways that belonging is not so easily remedied by blood and the meaning we attribute to it, and the ways that colonization and global anti-Blackness can create a sense of homelessness for Black people. So by shifting to an examination of how disbelonging is lived and practiced, my project attempts to attend to the everydayness of diaspora and consider what possibilities lay alongside and beyond trauma narratives of loss, displacement, and of displacement for diasporic subjects. For me, studying world-making captures the ways diasporic subjects navigate, think about, and construct their identities. In so much of diaspora studies, the main focus is on national boundaries and national borders, which are absolutely important to name because they have real and oftentimes violent implications for individuals. But what I want to say is that by considering the everyday, affect, and the erotic, and as well as psychic constructions of home, we can attend to the ways that people make up for the shortcomings of home and belonging. I know from personal experience that the idea of home for many first and 1.5 generation immigrants is so often a site of disappointment, trapped between nostalgia and the realities of globalization and modernity. And so then why do we cling so furiously? For many of us, we cling to the idea of home and homeland because we've been told that these are places that will always desire us, that our belonging is guaranteed. And I'm here to say that this is a myth. Belonging is continuous work, and it's valuable work. This belonging offers the option to let go of the fantasy of a static belonging and find comfort in the complexities of in-betweenness. It gives us permission to release the singular belief that the experience of existing in the in-between is inherently traumatic, and accept that this is the very nature of diaspora, as well as consider the ways in which diasporic connections are broken and created anew. Thank you.